Jeff Zwarenk here, and welcome to Give and Take, where we give you reasons to believe that Christianity is true and equip you to go out and tell others about it. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues Ken Samples and Hugh Ross, and we are going to discuss an important question. Did animals die because of Adam's sin? Ken, Hugh, good to have you here today.
Thank you.
Jeff.
So let's just address that. Are there any passages, or what passages in the Bible talk about how animals died or did not die before Adam and Eve sinned?
Well, the Bible is silent on that question. Nowhere in the Old or New Testament does it say there was no animal death before the fall. We do have the text in Romans 5, which talks about when human death began, but it's specific to human beings. It says death through sin was visited to all people, not all life.
So this going back
people.
to the fall in there, where God says, "In the day you eat of this fruit, you're going to die."
Right.
Humanity died. Is there any passages that talk about where animals don't die? I mean, you've got passages like the lion's going to lie down with the lamb that seems to be something different than what we see today. Does that imply that there wasn't carnivorous activity in the past?
Well, that's a reference to the future. It says nothing about the past.
And thus, I think largely the position rests on looking at New Testament passages, particularly Romans, that talks about human death and kind of expanding it to all death. So I think it's a misreading of particularly the Romans passage.
So let me ask the question a little bit a different way. So one of the charges against old earth creationists, which we're old earth creationists, think the earth is billions of years old, is that, even if humanity's recent, you have in this just lots of death in creation. Animals eating other animals, bacteria eating animals, death, disease. That's just abundant throughout the fossil record. So if animals died before Adam and Eve sinned, does that in any way impact any important Christian doctrines?
I would say no. I would say that, quite frankly, the Bible talks about death resulting from the fall to human beings. I don't see anything in the death of animals throughout history that would negate either Jewish or Christian teaching. I do think, Jeff, that there is sometimes a sentimentality that is, I was telling people at an earlier discussion that, I think predators are pretty cool in their abilities and the things that they're able to do. Until the predator, eats your cat, then there is this sense of sorrow and pain. So I think sometimes people get really worked up about animal death and animal suffering, but more because we look at it as human beings and see sorrow.
That's an interesting point. I'm going to kind of loop back to that in a second here. But I guess I want to kind of ask the question, you look through the Old Testament and there's a lot of sacrifices, and even, in Genesis 1 there, right, that or in Genesis 3 where Adam and Eve had sinned, that God killed an animal and gave them skins. There seems to be this idea that animal death is in some way related to atonement. And so if animals are dying before Adam and Eve sin, that undermines atonement. Is there any legitimacy to that argument?
I would say none based on what you see in the book of Hebrews, because Hebrews 9 and 10 makes it clear that the death of these animals has no effect on atonement. Only the blood of Christ atones. And so what God was doing was using these animal sacrifices as a symbol for the one blood atonement that would deliver us from sin, the blood of Christ.
So the animals dying is part of being aware of atonement, but it is not actually doing the atoning.
It's not doing the atonement.
So in other words, I guess to conflate animal death with the atonement is that's actually a pretty serious mistake there in some sense then, is it not?
And I think Scripture even speaks to that introducing Christ as the fulfillment of all of those symbols. It's very important to see the Old Testament in light of the coming of Jesus Christ, in light of his life, death, and resurrection.
So I guess that's in a large part why we're not still doing animal sacrifices in some sense.
Indeed, yes.
So let me turn that question around. So, I mean, we've looked at it from the standpoint of would animal death actually undermine the gospel? And it seems like, no, it doesn't undermine the atonement. It seems to fit well. There's nothing fundamental that it does. let me ask the question the other way. Why would God create a universe, or create an earth, at least here, where animals are dying? Is there any utility in that?
Well, there is a utility in the sense that thanks to all this plant and animal death that preceded us, we human beings can establish a large population with the technology to take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world in thousands of years rather than millions of years.
So how does that play out? Put a little bit of specificity to that. I mean, what is it that, deer and antelope and elk dying and getting stuck in tar pits? I mean, so where does that actually play out?
Oh, where do you think the tar comes from? I mean, the tar is basically the residue of dead animals that preceded us. And so all that coal, oil, and natural gas is available to us because of all these generations of plant and animal death that preceded us. And that's just a tiny part of it. Limestone and marble adds up to 75 quadrillion tons that we're able to exploit.
And limestone and marble being the decaying shells, or the shells of decaying animals,
correct,
if you will. So.
But that's how we build our freeways and our skyscrapers. So all this amazing technology we have is thanks to the fact that God has packed our planet with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible, and as long as possible. And that's what makes the redemption of humanity able to be fulfilled in just a short period of time. So we're the beneficiaries.
God's actually providing the resources, given the laws of physics. He set things up. He's providing us with the resources to do what he's asking us to do.
It's a gift. It's a gift to humanity.
There's another aspect that I'd like to look at. Because you look at some of the animals, and they're also very efficient predators, if you will. Kind of the idea that they just became that way after the fall would mean that there's almost a hodgepodge to that. It almost looks like they're designed. How would you articulate that, or what would you respond to that?
Well, you're right on target. I mean, the way God has designed these predators, it actually maximizes the quality of life and the population of the herbivores.
How do you mean that?
Okay. Notice that the predators are designed so that they're only able to kill the weak, the sick, the dying, and the unwary. That actually helps the health of the predator, of the herbivore population. And we've seen...
So it provides food for the predator as well as keeping the herbivore population healthy and strong as well.
Healthy and strong and at a high population level. Take away the predators and you're going to have immense death and suffering amongst the herbivore population. So it's actually a gift to the very prey upon which the predators are feeding.
When we look at the idea of animals dying before Adam and Eve sin, it does have this very emotional, kind of sentimental aspect, because we have a relationship with a number of these animals. But when we investigate closely, we see that nothing about animals dying before Adam and Eve sin does it impact any important Christian doctrine. It doesn't undermine the atonement. In fact, what we see as we investigate creation, that this animal death and plants and animals dying before Adam and Eve sin is actually part of how God is preparing the planet so that we can fulfill the mission that He has given us to go spread the gospel. So let's go over and see what Monica is saying now.